The crack of a whip silenced the saloon as Kieran Holt pushed through the swinging doors, leading a slender woman by a delicate chain that seemed too fragile to hold anyone truly captive. It was 1871 in the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, and the sight of a lone cowboy with a slave was enough to draw every pair of bloodshot eyes in the establishment. "Well, looky what we got here, boys," drawled Vernon Stiles, the notorious leader of the Red Canyon Gang. "Holt's gone and got himself a little plaything." Kieran's face remained impassive as he guided the woman Maribel Santiago according to the bill of sale he'd burned the moment they'd left the auction to the bar. Her dark eyes were downcast, her once fine dress torn and stained from the journey. Despite the dirt smudging her olive skin, there was an unmistakable dignity in how she held herself. "Whiskey," Kieran told the barkeep, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "2 glasses." Vernon's laugh boomed across the room. "You buyin' your property a drink now, Holt?" "What's next? Gonna ask her to dance?" Kieran poured a glass and slid it toward Maribel before turning to face Vernon. "She is the only treasure I need," he said simply, his hand instinctively moving to the worn handle of his Colt. "You're a damn fool," Vernon spat. "Wasting your money on damaged goods when there's gold in them hills." Maribel's fingers closed around the glass, but she didn't drink. Her eyes, for just a moment, flicked up to study the man who had purchased her freedom only to claim her as his own. "Maybe so," Kieran replied, his voice betraying nothing of the storm brewing within. "But I reckon I know my business better than you know yours." The outlaw's laughter died down as Kieran drained his glass and guided Maribel toward the stairs. They had a long journey ahead, and tonight would be their last in any semblance of civilization for quite some time. What the outlaws couldn't know, what no one could know, was that Kieran Holt had no intention of keeping Maribel Santiago as a slave. But sometimes, in the harsh reality of the frontier, the only way to save someone was to pretend to own them. As they reached the landing, Maribel finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Kieran unlocked the shackle from her wrist when they entered their room, tossing the chain onto the bed. "Because no one deserves to be owned," he said, staring out the window at the street below. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." Maribel rubbed her wrist, eyeing the door. "And if I run?" "Then you run," he said simply. "But there's 3 men downstairs who'd love nothing more than to catch you, and I can't help you if that happens." She studied him carefully, trying to understand the contradiction of the man before her. "Where are we going?" "North," Kieran answered, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy hair. "I've got a small spread near the Colorado border. It's nothing fancy, but it's far from anyone who might recognize you. And what am I to you there?" Kieran turned to face her fully. "Free. You'll be free to stay or go once we're clear of danger." Maribel's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Men don't spend good money freeing slaves without expecting something in return." "My brother was killed by men who thought they had the right to own others," Kieran said flatly. "I made him a promise." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Kieran took the floor, leaving the bed to Maribel. They were strangers bound by circumstance, and neither fully trusted the other. But as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, they departed Redemption Creek together, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them. They rode for 3 days across the harsh landscape, stopping only when necessary. Maribel proved to be a capable rider, though it was clear she hadn't spent much time in the saddle. During their journey, words were sparse between them. Kieran would occasionally point out landmarks or warn of dangerous terrain, while Maribel would sometimes ask practical questions about their route or the next water source. On the evening of the 3rd day, As they made camp beside a small creek, Maribel finally broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "You never asked about my past," she said, watching Kieran prepare their simple meal of beans and salt pork. He shrugged. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." "I was not born a slave," she said, her voice strengthening with each word. "My father was a doctor in Santa Fe. We had a good life until the fever took him 2 winters ago." Kieran listened silently, stirring the beans in the small pot. "My cousin promised to care for me," Maribel continued, her hands twisting in her lap. "Instead, he sold me to cover his gambling debts, said no one would look for a Mexican woman in Arizona territory." "Your cousin was wrong," Kieran said quietly. "I'm guessing you've got people looking for you." Maribel's eyes glistened in the firelight. "My younger sister, Isabel. She was visiting our aunt when I was taken. She would not have known what happened." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "Once we reach my place, we can send word to Santa Fe. Let her know you're safe." "Why would you do that?" "You paid $300 for me." "I didn't pay for you," Kieran corrected. "I paid for your freedom. There's a difference." That night, Maribel slept closer to the fire and closer to Kieran than she had on previous nights. The wall between them hadn't fallen, but perhaps a small window had opened. The next morning, disaster struck. As they were preparing to depart, 3 riders appeared on the ridge above their campsite. Kieran recognized them immediately, Vernon Stiles and 2 of his men. "Keep your head down," Kieran whispered urgently to Maribel. "Let me handle this." Vernon's horse slid down the embankment, sending rocks and dust flying. "Fancy meeting you here, Holt," he called out, his yellow-toothed grin spreading beneath his unkempt mustache. "We was just heading to the Blackwell claim. Heard there's good pickings there." "Roads free to all," Kieran replied evenly, his hand resting casually near his holster. Vernon's eyes drifted to Maribel. "Your little investment seems to be missing her chain. Ain't wise, letting valuable property wander free. As I said before, my business is my own." Vernon dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached. "Thing is, Holt, I've been thinking about your business. Seems to me you overpaid something fierce for this one." He reached out to touch Maribel's face, but Kieran stepped between them. "I wouldn't," Kieran warned. Vernon's companions had dismounted as well, spreading out to flank them. 3 against 1, Holt. Bad odds even for a quick draw like yourself. What do you want, Stiles?" "Just being neighborly," Vernon replied, his eyes never leaving Maribel. "Thought maybe you'd be interested in sharing. We've got a long ride ahead and could use some companionship." Kieran's voice dropped dangerously low. "Turn around and ride out while you still can." The standoff seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, Vernon stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get all riled up. We'll be on our way." He mounted his horse, looking down at them with undisguised malice. "But the territory's a dangerous place. Never know when paths might cross again." As the 3 riders disappeared over the ridge, Kieran quickly began breaking camp. "We need to move. They won't go far." "They will come back," Maribel stated, not a question but a certainty. Kieran nodded grimly. "Yes, they will. Our best chance is to change course. There's a settlement about a day's ride east of here. We can rest there, then cut north through Miller's Pass." "That will add days to our journey," Maribel observed, already helping to pack their belongings. "Better slow than dead," Kieran replied. "Or worse." They rode hard that day, pushing their horses as much as they dared in the unforgiving terrain. By nightfall, they had reached the small settlement of Cooper's Mill, little more than a trading post, a blacksmith, and a handful of homesteads clustered around a spring. The proprietor of the trading post, a grizzled old-timer named Lee Cooper, offered them shelter in a small back room. "Not much, but it's dry and the door locks," he told them. eyeing Maribel curiously but asking no questions. That night, as they sat on opposite sides of the small room, Maribel broke their silence. "You could have left me. It would have been easier." Kieran looked up from cleaning his revolver. "Easier isn't always right. The men at the saloon, they called you a fool." "Wouldn't be the first time," he said with a hint of a smile. "Won't be the last." "Tell me about your brother," Maribel said suddenly. "The one you made a promise to." Kieran's hand stilled. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then he set the gun aside and leaned back against the wall. "Thomas was younger than me by 4 years. Smart as a whip, always had his nose in a book. After our parents died, I did my best to raise him right." Kieran's eyes grew distant. "When the war came, I joined up with the Union. Thomas stayed behind to mind our small farm in Kansas." Maribel listened intently, her expression softening. "While I was away, a group of bushwhackers raided our town. They took whatever they wanted, including people. Thomas tried to stop them from taking our neighbor's daughter." Kieran's voice grew tight. "They beat him so badly he lasted only 3 days after I got home." "I am sorry," Maribel said softly. "Before he died, he made me promise I'd help others who couldn't help themselves, especially those being treated as property instead of people." Kieran picked up his gun again, resuming his cleaning with methodical precision. "So that's what I do when I can." Maribel moved across the room and sat beside him. Slowly, cautiously, she placed her hand over his. "Your brother would be proud." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a connection formed through shared pain and unexpected kindness. The moment was broken by a commotion outside. Shouts and the sounds of horses approaching at speed filled the night air. Kieran was on his feet in an instant, peering through the small window. "Stiles," he confirmed grimly. "And he's brought more men." Maribel's face paled. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now. We need to go." Kieran gathered their few belongings while Maribel peered anxiously out the window. "There are at least 6 of them," she reported. "They have surrounded the trading post." A pounding at the front door made them both freeze. They could hear Ellie Cooper's muffled voice, then Vernon's louder response. "We're looking for a man and a Mexican woman. Seen him." Kieran motioned for Maribel to follow him to the back of the room where a small window looked out onto the darkness behind the building. "We'll have to leave the horses," he whispered. "There's woods about 100 yards that way, if we can reach them." The sound of the front door being kicked in spurred them into action. Kieran helped Maribel through the window first, then followed, landing silently in the dirt. They crouched low, using the shadows to conceal their movement as they made their way toward the tree line. They had almost reached the safety of the woods when a shout went up from behind them. "There they are!" Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dust at their feet. Kieran pulled Maribel into the trees, the darkness swallowing them as they ran deeper into the forest. They ran until their lungs burned, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Finally, when Maribel stumbled, Kieran pulled her into a hollow beneath a fallen tree. "We will rest here for a moment," he whispered, his breathing heavy. "But we can't stay long." Maribel nodded, too exhausted to speak. They sat in silence, straining to hear any sound of their pursuers over their own labored breathing. "Why do they want me so badly?" Maribel finally asked. Kieran's expression darkened. "Men like Stiles take what they want because they can. If someone says no, it only makes them want it more. And you? What do you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "I want to keep my promise," Kieran answered after a long pause, "and maybe find some peace along the way." Maribel studied his face in the dim moonlight filtering through the branches. "I believe you," she said simply. They traveled through the night, navigating by stars and Kieran's knowledge of the territory. By dawn, They had put several miles between themselves and Cooper's mill, but they were now without horses, supplies, or a clear path forward. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles north of here," Kieran said as they paused to drink from a small stream. "Used to belong to the Whitman Ranch before they sold out. Might still have some supplies." Maribel nodded, her exhaustion evident but her determination unwavering. "Then we keep moving." The day grew brutally hot as they trekked across the open country, staying low and using what cover they could find. By mid-afternoon, the line shack came into view, a weathered structure nearly reclaimed by the land around it. Inside, they found dusty shelves with a few cans of food, some jerky too tough to chew but still edible when softened in water, and most precious of all, a canteen and a worn blanket. "We should rest," Kieran suggested, seeing how Maribel swayed on her feet. "I'll take first watch." Maribel didn't argue, collapsing onto the small cot in the corner. She was asleep almost instantly, the events of the past day taking their toll. Kieran sat by the door, his revolver in his lap, watching the horizon for any sign of pursuit. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, he allowed himself to study Maribel's sleeping form. In sleep, the worry lines between her brows smoothed out, making her look younger and more vulnerable. Her dark hair fell across her face, and without thinking, Kieran reached over to gently brush it back. His fingers lingered for just a moment too long, and Maribel's eyes fluttered open, their gazes locked, and neither moved for a heartbeat. Then Maribel sat up slowly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice husky from rest. "A few hours," Kieran replied, withdrawing his hand. "No sign of trouble." Maribel stretched, wincing slightly. "I am not used to running for my life," she said with a small smile. "My feet may never forgive me." "We'll find horses in the next town," Kieran promised. "Should reach it by tomorrow afternoon if we start at first light." Maribel nodded, then rose to inspect the meager supplies they'd found. "I can make us something to eat," she offered. "It will not be fancy, but it will be warm." As she worked with the few ingredients available, Kieran found himself watching her hands, graceful despite the circumstances, efficient in their movements. There was a quiet competence about her that he admired. They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal of beans and jerky tasting better than it had any right to. Afterward, as the last light faded from the sky, Maribel asked the question that had been on her mind since Cooper's mill. "If we make it to your home," she began cautiously, "what happens then?" Kieran considered his words carefully. "Like I said before, you'll be free to go wherever you want. I can help you get word to your sister, maybe even arrange passage back to Santa Fe if that's what you want." "And if I wanted to stay?" The question was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. Their eyes met across the small space, and Kieran felt something tighten in his chest. "Then you'd stay as a free woman, not beholden to anyone. My land needs tending, and I could use the help if you're offering." It wasn't quite what either of them meant, and they both knew it, but it was all they could voice for now. The next morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. They set out at dawn, Kieran leading them north along a game trail that would eventually connect with the main road to Silverton. They traveled in silence for the most part, alert for any sign of danger. Around midday, they crested a small rise and spotted a lone rider in the distance, heading in their direction. Kieran pulled Maribel into the cover of a rocky outcropping, drawing his pistol as they waited to see who approached. As the rider drew nearer, Kieran relaxed slightly. "It's a woman," he observed, peering around the rock. "Alone from the looks of it." The rider, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, noticed them and slowed her horse. She raised a hand in greeting, showing she was unarmed. "Hello, the rocks," she called out. "I mean no harm." Kieran stepped out cautiously, keeping his hand near his holster. "Madam," he acknowledged with a nod, "you're a fair piece from anywhere out here." The woman smiled, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of her eyes. "I could say the same for you folks, especially without horses." She studied them for a moment. "You two look like you've had a rough go of it." "We've seen better days," Kieran admitted. "Name's Ruth Palmer. I run the stage stop about 3 miles up the road." She gestured with her thumb. "You folks look like you could use a meal and maybe a roof for the night." Kieran exchanged a glance with Maribel. They were in desperate need of help, but strangers couldn't be trusted easily, not with Stiles and his men still hunting them. Seeming to read their hesitation, Ruth added, "Had some trouble pass through yesterday." "Rough sorts asking about a couple matching your description." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't much care for men who hunt people." "Why would you help us?" Maribel asked, stepping forward to stand beside Kieran. Ruth shrugged. "Out here, folks have to look out for each other." "Besides," she added with a knowing glance at their dirty, travel-worn appearance, "seems to me whatever you're running from, you've got good reason." After a moment's consideration, Kieran nodded. "We'd be grateful for your help, Mrs. Palmer." "It's Miss," she corrected with a wink. "Never found a man worth the trouble. Now, let's get you two back to the station before those miscreants circle back this way." Ruth insisted Maribel ride double with her, while Kieran jogged alongside. The stage station came into view just as Kieran's legs were beginning to give out. A sturdy log building with a corral and stable set against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. "It ain't much," Ruth said as they approached, "but it's defendable if need be." Inside, the station was simple but clean, with a large common room for passengers to wait and eat, and several small bedrooms for overnight stays. Ruth showed them to a room at the back of the building, then busied herself preparing a meal. "Stage isn't due until tomorrow," she explained as she set plates of hot food before them. "So you've got time to rest up before deciding your next move." Kieran explained their situation, a simplified version that omitted certain details, but conveyed the danger they were in. Ruth listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. "Stiles has been a plague on these parts for years," she said when he finished. "Law can't seem to catch up to him, or maybe they just don't try hard enough." She refilled their coffee cups. "But you two have bigger problems." "Word is there's a bounty on you now." Maribel's hand froze halfway to her mouth. "A bounty? For what crime?" "According to Stiles, for theft of property, meaning you, miss, and for the murder of Lee Cooper." Kieran's face hardened. "Cooper is dead," Ruth nodded grimly. "Shot when he wouldn't tell them which way you went. Stiles is claiming you did it, of course." "That is a lie," Maribel said, her voice shaking with anger. "We were running for our lives when we heard the gunshot." "I believe you," Ruth assured her. "But others might not, especially with $500 on your heads." Kieran pushed away from the table, pacing the small room. "We need to keep moving. The longer we stay in one place, the more danger we bring to it." Ruth watched him thoughtfully. "The stage tomorrow is heading north to Durango. The driver, Jesse, is a good man. He'd take you, no questions asked." "And lead Stiles right to us," Kieran pointed out. "Not necessarily," Ruth countered. "Jesse knows every back trail in these mountains. And Stiles is looking for a man and woman on foot or horseback, not passengers on the stage." It was a risk, but one with better odds than continuing on foot through territory Stiles knew well. After discussing it further, they agreed to take the stage the next day. That night, Ruth gave them fresh clothes and a chance to bathe, luxuries they hadn't expected to find in their flight. Afterward, sitting clean and fed beside a warm fire, Maribel found herself studying Kieran's profile as he stared into the flames. Without the layer of trail dust, she could see him clearly for the first time, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more in happier times, the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. He was handsome in a weathered way, like the land itself, harsh at first glance but with an underlying strength and beauty. As if feeling her gaze, Kieran turned to meet her eyes. "You should get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a long day. What about you?" "I'll keep watch for a while." Maribel hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm. "You need rest too. We are safe here, at least for tonight." The simple touch sent a current between them, and for a moment neither moved. Then Kieran covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "When this is over," he began, his voice low, "when you're truly free and safe." "Yes," Maribel prompted when he fell silent. "I'd like to know you better," he finished simply. "The real you, not just the woman I'm trying to help." Maribel felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that too." Morning brought a flurry of activity as the stage station prepared for the arrival of the coach. Ruth provided them with hats and coats that would help disguise their appearance, and Kieran purchased 2 tickets to Durango with the last of his money. "Jesse knows to expect you," Ruth told them as they waited. "He'll watch out for you as best he can." The stage arrived with a clatter of hooves and creaking wheels, the driver a burly man with a magnificent beard acknowledging Ruth with a tip of his hat. There were only 2 other passengers, an elderly gentleman heading home to Durango and a young store clerk returning from a buying trip. As they boarded, Ruth pressed a small bundle into Maribel's hands. "Food for the journey," she explained, "and a little something extra just in case." The something extra turned out to be a small Derringer pistol tucked discreetly at the bottom of the bundle. Maribel glanced up in surprise, and Ruth gave her a knowing nod. "A woman should always have options," she said quietly. The stage departed with a lurch, and soon the station disappeared from view as they wound their way through the hills. Kieran and Maribel sat close together, their shoulders touching as the coach swayed along the rough road. For the first few hours, the journey was uneventful. The other passengers kept to themselves, and Jesse proved to be as skilled a driver as Ruth had claimed, navigating the difficult terrain with ease. By mid-afternoon, they had entered a narrow canyon that Jesse explained was a shortcut few knew about. "Cuts half a day off the regular route," he called down from his perch. "Bit rough, but worth it." The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, casting the stage into shadow. It was cooler here, and Maribel found herself leaning into Kieran's warmth. His arm slipped around her shoulders, a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the peace. The stage lurched violently as Jesse shouted and snapped the reins. More shots followed, bullets splintering wood and sending the passengers diving for cover. "Ambush!" Jesse yelled, urging the team to greater speed. Kieran pushed Maribel to the floor of the coach, shielding her with his body as he drew his revolver. The other passengers were shouting in panic, the elderly man clutching his chest as the young clerk tried to keep him calm. Through the window, Kieran caught glimpses of riders pursuing them, 5 men, with Vernon Stiles in the lead. They were gaining fast, the narrow canyon offering little room for the stage to maneuver. "Hold on," Jesse called down as the stage careened around a sharp bend. The moment they cleared the turn, Jesse pulled the team hard to the right, bringing the stage to a skidding halt beside a cluster of boulders. "Out! Everyone out!" he commanded. "We'll make a stand here." They scrambled from the coach, Jesse helping the elderly passenger while Kieran and the clerk provided covering fire. Maribel followed, the small Derringer clutched in her hand. Behind the rocks, They had a defensible position, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The pursuers pulled up short, just out of effective pistol range. "Holt," Vernon's voice echoed in the canyon. "Send out the woman and we'll let the rest of you live." "Not going to happen, Stiles," Kieran called back. "You're harboring a fugitive and a murderer." $500 dead or alive, Jesse spat in the dirt. "That man's a bigger liar than a snake oil salesman," he muttered. "Ruth told me what really happened." Kieran nodded gratefully, then turned to Maribel. "Stay low. If things go bad, there's a trail up through those rocks. Follow it until you reach the main road." "I am not leaving you," she replied fiercely. Before Kieran could argue, gunfire erupted as Stiles and his men charged their position. Jesse and Kieran returned fire, forcing the attackers to seek cover. The young clerk, though clearly terrified, joined in with a small pocket pistol. The exchange continued for several minutes, neither side gaining an advantage. Then Maribel noticed two of Stiles's men working their way along the canyon wall, attempting to flank their position. "Kieran," she warned, pointing to the danger. He saw it too late. One of the outlaws had a clear shot and took it, his bullet grazing Kieran's side. He stumbled, nearly dropping his gun as pain lanced through him. Without hesitation, Maribel raised the derringer and fired. The small gun had limited range, but at that moment the outlaw was close enough. He fell with a cry, clutching his shoulder. The firefight intensified. Jesse took a bullet to the leg but continued to return fire, his face a mask of determination. The elderly passenger had passed out from the excitement, and the clerk was down to his last few bullets. "We can't hold out much longer," Kieran said through gritted teeth, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. As if in answer to his words, a new sound cut through the gunfire hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast from the direction they had been heading. "Riders coming," the clerk shouted. For a terrible moment, Kieran thought it might be more of Stiles's men. Then he saw the glint of sunlight on a badge as a group of mounted men rounded the bend, rifles at the ready. "U.S. Marshals," a commanding voice shouted. "Drop your weapons." The tide turned instantly. Stiles and his remaining men found themselves caught in the open between two groups of armed opponents. After a brief, desperate attempt to fight their way out, they surrendered. The lead marshal, a stern-faced man named Daniel Foster, listened carefully as Kieran explained the situation. Jesse and the clerk corroborated his story, adding details about Stiles's reputation in the territory. "We've been after Stiles for months," Marshal Foster revealed. "Got word he was in the area and came to investigate. Seems we arrived just in time." As the marshals secured the prisoners, a medic tended to Kieran's wound and Jesse's injured leg. Maribel never left Kieran's side, her hand clasped tightly in his. "I need to make a statement about what really happened at Cooper's Mill," Kieran told the marshal. "An innocent man was killed and Stiles tried to pin it on us." Marshal Foster nodded. "We'll get it all sorted out. For now, you both need medical attention. There's a doctor in Durango who can tend to you properly." The journey to Durango was slower with the wounded, but 2 days later they arrived safely in the bustling mountain town. The doctor confirmed that Kieran's wound, while painful, wasn't serious, and with proper care, he would heal completely. While recovering, Kieran sent telegrams, one to the authorities in Santa Fe regarding Maribel's kidnapping, and another to her sister Isabel, letting her know Maribel was safe. The response came quickly. Isabel would come to Durango as soon as arrangements could be made. As they waited for news of Stiles's fate and Isabel's arrival, Kieran and Maribel found themselves in a strange limbo. The danger had passed, but the future remained uncertain. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where they were staying, Maribel finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "When Isabel arrives, I will have a choice to make," she began, watching Kieran's face carefully. "Return to Santa Fe or, Kieran prompted when she fell silent, "or accept your offer to stay at your ranch." She took a deep breath. "But I need to know what that offer truly means." Kieran turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "When I first saw you at that auction, something inside me couldn't bear the thought of you being treated as property. I told myself I was just keeping my promise to Thomas." Maribel waited, her heart beating rapidly. "But these past weeks, running for our lives, facing death together, I've come to care for you in ways I never expected." His eyes held hers, honest and vulnerable. "I'm offering you a home, Maribel, a partnership if you want it, not as my worker or my ward, but as my equal. And perhaps in time as more than that," she asked softly. Kieran's smile was warm enough to chase away the evening chill. "Yes, if that's what you want too." Maribel leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. "The outlaws mocked you for taking a slave," Maribel whispered, "but you never saw me as one." "You are the only treasure I need," Kieran replied, echoing the words he'd spoken in the saloon all those weeks ago. But now they carried a different weight, a truth that had grown between them through hardship and healing. Isabel arrived a week later, the reunion between the sisters filled with tears and joy. After hearing the full story, she understood why Maribel might choose to stay with Kieran rather than return to Santa Fe. "You have found something precious here," Isabel observed, watching how Kieran looked at her sister. "Something worth building a life around." The trial of Vernon Stiles and his gang was swift, with multiple witnesses and the testimony of the U.S. Marshals. They were convicted of murder, kidnapping, and numerous other crimes. The bounty on Kieran and Maribel was rescinded, their names cleared of any wrongdoing. When it was time to leave Durango, Isabel returned to Santa Fe with a promise to visit soon. Kieran and Maribel set out for his ranch in the high country, a journey that felt like a beginning rather than an escape. They arrived as autumn was painting the aspen trees gold. The ranch was small but well built, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. A stream ran along the eastern edge and fields stretched to the south where cattle grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," Maribel said as they rode up to the cabin. "It needs work," Kieran admitted. "Been away too long." "Then we will work together," she replied simply. And they did. Through the winter and into spring, they repaired fences, tended livestock, and made the cabin into a home. Kieran taught Maribel about ranching, and she shared her knowledge of medicine learned from her father. They complemented each other in ways neither had expected. They were married the following summer, a small ceremony attended by Isabel, Ruth Palmer, Jesse the stage driver, and a few neighbors who had come to know and respect the couple. Marshall Foster made an appearance as well, bringing news that the territory was finally free of outlaws like Stiles. Years passed, and the ranch prospered. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, first a son named Thomas, after Kieran's brother, then twin girls who had their mother's dark eyes and their father's determination. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Maribel leaned against Kieran's shoulder. "You ever think about that day in the saloon?" she asked. "When you told those men I was the only treasure you needed?" Kieran's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes, though I didn't know then how true those words would become." Maribel smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from captivity to freedom, from strangers to lovers, from fugitives to family. The greatest treasures, she said, are the ones we never knew we were searching for. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Kieran kissed his wife with the same tenderness as their first embrace. In a world that had once sought to keep them apart, they had found not just sanctuary but a love powerful enough to overcome any obstacle. And in the end, that was the only treasure either of them would ever need.